So how might we use a user form to edit an existing entry in the database? Now this is quite a complicated task. It's certainly more difficult than adding an entry to the bottom of the database, which is what we've done so far. And as usual, there's going to be a number of different elements interacting. There'll be some formula, some visual basic code, the user form itself, a combo box, all these different elements interacting to achieve the desired effect. So let's get into the task. I've got the download file open. This is the completed download file. So if I hit edit here, I get this user form pop up and it has a combo box in, and I can select a record to edit there. I'm going to choose the first record, continue. And then the same user form that we created pops up, and it's already populated with the details of the first person in the database. So let's say I wanted to edit this person's name. I can do that very quickly. Tab through down to the continue button, and we can see that those details have been edited. So really powerful functionality here, allowing us to edit the entry in the database. But as with anything complicated in Excel, whether we're talking about formulae, data analysis, or in this case, a coding task, we have to take a step back and think step by step, how are we going to go through the task? If we just throw ourselves into the Visual Basic Editor with no clear concept in our mind what we're going to do, we're going to get lost very quickly. So the first task, a sensible place to start, we're going to have to identify identify the record we want to edit in the database. That's the focus of this video. How could we look at a database, allow the user to choose which row in the database he or she wants to edit, and then identify where that record is in the database. So the first task is to look at creating this user form that has a menu in that allows the user to select somebody in the database. I'm going to make sure I'm working in the right area here. So I'm in the area that refers to the start file, which is the file that we're working through. So we're going to put a new user form in. We did that at the beginning of the series. So insert user form. I'm going to resize this a little bit. I don't think it needs to be that good, that big rather. And then we want this menu to appear. So previously we've put menus into user forms in this series, so you might be able to remember. We're going to use a combo box. So the combo box goes in, something like that, maybe just a touch smaller. There we go, the combo box goes in. And let's put some code in now, or let's put the mechanism now into the spreadsheet to make this new user form we've just created, to make it appear. So I could insert a new button, but why not just use the existing button? And I'm going to make sure these two buttons are the same size just by sizing it to a column here, using the Alt key, sizing the button to a column. I know these two columns are the same size, they're both 8 in width. So now if I copy paste this column, holding down the Control key, dragging over, and then snap the new button to the same column, I know they're going to be the same size. And then we're going to type edit as the text on this button, hold down the Control key, select both buttons, hold down the Alt key, then just dragging back into position. So this seems to be doing the job. So we want to be able to click the edit button, and the new user form we've just created, we want that to flash up. So how might we do that? Making sure I'm in the right area again. You'll remember right at the beginning of the series, we created a module to put the code in that's going to make the user forms display. And I've got data UF here. My other user form has gone to the bottom of the Project Explorer here. So let's give it a sensible name, the user form, and let's call it make sure I'm clicking on the user form there. Let's call it find underscore entry underscore UF. So I can tell from the name of the user form what the user form is doing. I'm going to copy paste the name of the user form because I know I'm going to use that name in the routine we're creating to make the user form pop up. And I'm going to call it show edit user form. There we go. So this routine we've just created, we've got to assign it to a button in the spreadsheet. So I'm going to right click on the edit button. Make sure you're working on the right file here because the files are beginning to look quite similar. And then assign macro, and then show edit user form is the macro I just created. As usual, macros in other files also appear in this list, but with the name of the file first. So we can identify the macros in this file because they don't have a file name before them, just the name of the macro. That's the macro I just created in the Visual Basic Editor. So now if I click the edit button, we can see there that the user form pops up and we've got our combo box. We've got the menu, nothing yet showing in the menu. We've got to tell Excel what to show in this menu. That's what we're going to deal with next. Now, just to distinguish between the two files, I'm going to recolor this area here so that I know I'm working on the start file. There we go. So back to the Visual Basic Editor. So this menu, combo box, is the name of the control, of course. So we want to configure this so that all of the entries in the database appear. So how might we do that? Well, we know the entries in the database are in column E. We know that the name of the sheet is data. And we also know that the first row in the database is row 8. Let's go back to the combo box there. Okay, so going back to row source here. So if we say data E8 to, and I'm assuming in this series, I'm assuming in my case that we're going to have about 10,000 rows. So that's 10,000, 10,000 and 8. Okay, so we've got some information in the row source, just telling Excel where in the spreadsheet is the data that you want to appear in this menu. Okay, back to the spreadsheet. So now if I hit edit, we can see the names are appearing there, starting with Julia. She's at the top of the list, all the way down to the bottom. So this would work, but it would require the user to not do anything that we wouldn't expect, you might say. For example, what if the user went down here and selected something at the bottom? We've got all of this space at the end of the menu. Why do we have all that space? Well, if we think about how we put the reference in here, we referenced, let's go down to rows. Okay, make sure I'm on the combo box there. So we've got the combo box properties appearing now. Yeah, the reference here, E8 to E10,008. So in that menu, Excel is going all the way around down to row 10,000. That means there's lots of empty rows. And that means that when we view the menu, we get all of this empty space in the menu. Now, ideally, we'd want to avoid that. The menu is going to be easier to manipulate if there's fewer entries in it, and it's just more precise. So how might we do this more precisely? In the menu, we only want the rows that contain data to appear, but we also want the menu to be dynamic. If we add new data to the database, we want that to be included in the menu. So how might we do that? You might want to stop the video, see what ideas you've got. Well, one way to do this would be to define a dynamic name. Now, you can see in our videos on the offset formula, the offset formula and the offset commands in VBA. These are two of my favorite things in Excel. We can get lots of stuff done with the offset formula, particularly to do with controlling position. In this case, we want to control the length of the menu so that it includes all of the names in the database. That means the offset formula is going to help us. So I've just gone to the name manager, formula, name manager. We're going to define a name, and the name is going to help us get all of the names from the database. So new name. Let's call it, full name is a sensible name for this named range. Remember, the name should be informative. I'm going to call it din full name. I put din at the beginning to indicate to me that it's a dynamic range. So the range is going to get bigger and smaller according to how many entries in it. Remember, that's the effect we're trying to create here. If new entries are added, we want the range to get bigger. If entries are taken away, we want the range to get smaller. That's the dynamism we're talking about. So data, we're definitely on the right sheet, but we're going to begin with the offset formula. And offset requires an anchor point. Then we indicate if we want to move away from that anchor point. In this case, we don't. Then we indicate the length of the range and then the width of the range. They're the 5 components in the offset formula. As I say, go back to our offset formula videos if you want to know more about the offset formula. Really great formula in Excel, allows you to get loads done. So we're going to start here. This is going to be our anchor point. Do we want to go any rows down? No. Do we want to go any columns across? No. Then the 4th and 5th components relate to how big the range is, the number of rows and the number of columns in the range that we want to reference here. So how many rows are in the range? Well, this is the dynamic part, because this list might get longer, might get shorter. So we need a formula that tells us how many entries are in this column. Now, we've previously created that formula. Maybe you can remember. On the engine sheets, we have a formula here in B3, count A formula, that tells us how many entries are in this column. So again, we've got multiple elements working together, becoming more than the sum of their parts, achieving something really cool, really powerful. We've got a count A formula working with an offset formula here. So this is the completed formula, the anchor point, which is the beginning of the column there. Then we don't want to move away from that anchor point. And then the length of the list in B3 on the engine sheet, that's our count A formula. And then what's the width of the area we want to reference? Well, we only want to reference a single column, so we can have a 1 at the end there. Okay, I'm going to close this. And then just to see if this is working, I'm going to put a little test routine in here. Let's call it test dynamic range. And I'm going to say, just select the range that we've specified in the name manager, the dynamic range we've just created. Select that. So the name was din underscore full name. There we go. So that line of code should select the range. It's a good way to check if that dynamic range is accurate, if it's worked at all. So we're on the data sheet now. Just going to push this over here for a second, play the code, and we can see that what we've selected here. Going to play that one more time. There we go. So we can see what's selected here. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and there we go. It's selected the whole list, no additional cells selected at the end. So this seems to be doing the job. I'm going to reposition everything now. There we go. So if we can use this name we've just created as the row source property. So remember, we've got a combo box here, and in row source, we're indicating to Excel where's the data that we want to appear in this combo box, in this menu. So we're just going to put the name of the range we've created. We're going to put that in the row source property. Then let's see what happens here. Make sure I'm on the right file. There we go. Resize this. Okay, so we've got the combo box there. we've got all our entries appearing there, down to Martin A. Lutz, the last entry in the database. We can see we've got no more entries after that. So let's test this out. Let's add a new entry here. Let's put John Smith in. There we go. So he's in the database after Martin Lutz there. So that's the mechanism we created in the previous video. Seems to be working well. Then let's go to edit. So now I would expect John Smith to appear at the bottom of this menu. And there he is. So we've added him to the database. That means that the formula, the Count-A formula, updated. That in turn updated the range that the dynamic named range that we created refers to. That in turn updates the combo box, and we'll have that additional entry at the bottom. So you've got these different elements working together. Any one element is fairly simple, but getting them all working together to achieve this powerful functionality is more difficult. It will come with practice. So this seems to be working well, but this user form, the presentational value, it can certainly be improved. So what can we do to improve this? Let's give it an informative caption at the top. Let's say something like choose entry. That seems to make sense. And then we want a label here within the user form. Let's just say choose name from list. Or let's say choose the record you wish to edit. A little bit more precise with the language there. There we go. So we've got the label in there. We've got the combo box. What else do we want? Well, we want something to happen. We want the user to be able to click something to trigger some code. So what do we need on the user form to make that happen? Also, having a command button is going to help us. So select command button, just pop one in there. And then we'd want continue on this. We could have a cancel button here as well, but the user can just use the top right corner to cancel there. And because it's a very small user form, I don't think we really need a cancel button here. So we're building this up nicely. So I'm just going to activate the user form again there, load up the user form, and we can see we've got our dynamic list here. I can select somebody there. So this is looking good. So final thing, I want Excel to understand what row is this entry in. That's the final thing we're going to do in this video. So when I click the continue button, can we just make Excel flash up the row that this entry is in? So you might want to pause the video. How might we do that? What formulae might allow us to do that? So back to the Visual Basic Editor. I want some code to run when this button is clicked. So in the Visual Basic Editor, I'm just going to double click on this button, automatically created a routine for me there. First thing, put option explicit at the top of the routine. Now you would have seen this in our other videos. This means that Excel checks the variables before it runs the code and tells us if there's any problems. So it just allows us to understand what's going on if there's a problem much easier. So what do we want to do here? Well, we want to see the value that is selected in the combo box. We want to see how far down the list is this value. This is going to be important in the next video for when we edit the entry. So back to the code here. There we go. In fact, back to the object for a second. Let's go back to the user form. I'm just going to give this combo box a name. I don't like using combo box 1, the default name. Let's give it an informative name. Let's call it column E underscore menu. There we go, column E menu, because these are in column E. Okay, so what might we use to check how far down a list something appears? What formulae are available to us for doing that? Once again, we're going to use application worksheet function. Now this allows us to access worksheet formulae in the Visual Basic Editor to get stuff done. And we're going to use the match formula. Remember, the match formula tells us how far across a range of values a particular value is. You can look at our videos on the match formula. You'll see plenty of material. It often features in our coding videos as well. So the match formula, we need to say a particular value. So the value is going to be, briefly back to the user form, the value is going to be whatever's in the column E menu combo box. So we're going to match that in the range that contains all of the names. And remember, we've created a dynamic range that we can reference here, which is din full name, I believe. There we go. And then finally, I think a 0 is going to give us an exact match. But I'm just going to check that by checking the match formula in the worksheet. So I'm just going to do something silly now just to check that. Yeah, 0 is exact match in the match formula. Often when I'm using worksheet function, we don't get the prompts in the Visual Basic Editor. So I'll just go back to the worksheet, check what the components of the formula are. So I'm going to need a 0 at the end of this formula. Okay, back to the spreadsheet. Yeah, because I'm still editing the formula, it won't let me do anything in the Visual Basic Editor. Okay, there we go. So this is currently highlighted red. So we're not doing anything with this at the moment. But what we want to do is declare a variable here and then make the variable equal to the row that that person's name is on. So let's say target row, I think again, is an informative variable name. Target row as integer, so I'm assuming there's fewer than 32,000. If you had more than 32,000, you could use a long variable here. Okay, and then target row equals the match formula that we've just created. This is what we want to appear. And then let's just make it appear in a message box to evidence to us that it's actually working. So what are we expecting to happen? We've got a match formula here. The match formula is going to look up the value in the combo box in our range here, in our dynamic range that we configured earlier on in the video. And it should tell us how far down that range the value appears, because that's what the match formula does. And we're going to display that value in the message box. So let's just see how this goes. Edit. I'm going to choose the first record here, continue, and we'll see the match formula is returning a value of 1 there. So let's try somebody else, Ricky. So Ricky's a bit further down, 6 or 7 down. There we go. Let's try the bottom value in the database, John Smith, and it's returning 255 for John Smith. And John Smith is on row 255 in the database. So this seems to be making sense. Okay, that's as far as we're going to go in this video. So what have we done? Well, we've created this simple user form with a combo box in, and we created a dynamic range in the name manager, and it's dynamic because the range uses offsets to adjust the length of the range according to the number of values in the range. We're able to link the combo box to that range via the row source property. That means that only the number of people in the database will be displayed in the menu. But if we want to actually edit a record, then we have to identify how far down the database that record is. We're going to use that information in the next video to be able to edit the record in the database. That's as far as we're going to go in this video. In the next video, we're going to take it a step further and actually try to edit a record in the database. That means we're going to be pretty close to completing this user form task. I hope you'll join me in the next video.